Good afternoon, everyone. Many apologies for the slight delay. We've had some technical problems, but we should be able to kick off the session now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Priyanka, and this is the Caste Practice Research Network. Very happy New Year, everyone. We started this network last term with 3 wonderful sessions on majoritarianism and the politics of marginalization, centering Dalit feminist perspectives and the affective life of hierarchies. This network has grown out of our reading group, which is based at the Department of Sociology in Cambridge. And the aim with this network is to bring together established and emerging scholars to rethink existing analytical frameworks on caste through interdisciplinary collaboration. And this, we want to thank CRASSH and the Kellogg Foundation for making this interdisciplinary collaboration possible. Also to the Department of Sociology and the Faculty of Divinity for housing us. And thanks to all my co-conveners, Dr. Manali, Dr. Ankur, Dr. Jusmeet, and Vishal, who's right now in India on fieldwork. We have a fabulous lineup for the Lent term this time, and we're starting with caste, space, and sensoria. I'll introduce all our speakers first, and then we'll start the session. We have with us here today Dr. Srilata. Srilata is a senior lecturer in India and Global Affairs at the King's India Institute. Her research interests include urban political ecology of South Asia, the politics of caste in infrastructure building, and the political economy of subaltern urbanization. Dr. Bhawani is a postdoctoral researcher on the Peak Urban Program at the University of Oxford. His research interests include questions of social inequality, caste development, migration, urbanization, urban poverty, discrimination and stigma, dignity and the state, and citizenship. Dr. Jusmeet is a British Academy International Fellow at the Department of Sociology, Cambridge. He's an urban and political sociologist with deep interest in understanding caste-based inequalities rooted in space. Theoretically, he spends time thinking about how stigma affects space and how space affects the processes of stratification and reproduces inequality. He seeks to produce a theory of caste from the city. All our speakers will have about, I guess now 15 minutes because we're started a bit late, 15 minutes, and I will gently nudge you at the 12-minute mark. Over to you, Srilata. We start with Srilata. Thank you so much.
All right, then. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much to Priyanka, Jusmeet, Manali, and everybody else in the research network for giving me this lovely opportunity. I'm fresh out of maternity leave and it's my first gig, so be gentle. And that is only the first of many disclaimers that will come before I launch into the talk, because what I'm presenting today is not even work in progress. It's really sort of work at inception, because this is a project called Critical Caste Geographies, mapping the intersections of law, labor, and mobilities that only recently got funded and is yet to begin in practical terms. So I'm going to launch the project in September. And what I'm presenting today is not findings, not arguments, extremely speculative, bouncing ideas kind of things, but I'm hoping to present to you the framing of the project and a set of research questions that will hopefully, open the door to understanding caste from a slightly different lens, and coming to an understanding and a sort of a becoming of critical caste geographies. And I'll of course talk more about what I mean by that. Okay, so with all of those elaborate disclaimers, I'm now going to finally launch into it. And I'm going to start by acknowledging the work that a lot of my esteemed colleagues have already done around, the themes of spatialization of caste and the sensorial inscriptions of caste. And a lot of this work is within sociology, anthropology, and a little bit also in human geography, which is the discipline that I come from. I'm an urban geographer and now sort of branching out into hopefully critical caste geography. So this quote here from Joel Lee's article in 2017 really, defines it quite succinctly. And he says caste functions, among other things, as a spatial sensory order. And most of the work around understanding this spatial sensory order has been done, in my understanding, in sort of urban settings and largely in the context of waste work and other sort of caste-based professions that mainly pertain to castes that are inscribed as formerly untouchable or Dalit, and come from other sort of like subaltern positions within the caste hierarchy, within the spatial hierarchy, within the urban hierarchy, and all manners of marginalities and subaltern sort of positions. And a lot of this work relates to sort of outlining the affective and sensorial regimes around stigma, disgust, humiliation, and the alienation that is propagated through these affective forms, and the manner in which untouchability manifests in the modern day settings, in urban settings, in metropolitan settings. And in this, I would like to sort of, gesture towards my colleague Shivani Kapoor, with whom I have a podcast from a few years ago. She's done exceptional work on tracing the smell of caste in the leather industry in Uttar Pradesh. And even though she's an anthropologist, I think she also does a very good job of spatializing her analysis, talking about how within the microgeography of the tannery, microgeography of the leather studio, spaces are demarcated by which ones are for the craftsmen who are Dalit and which ones are for the owners and managers who are from elite caste backgrounds. And this demarcation is based on logics driven around sensory logics, such as those around smell, etc. I highly recommend, looking up her work. And yeah. We also see, similar kind of scholarship coming from contexts where caste is sort of unwritten and there is no kind of official terminology to read caste. I'm thinking of Waqas Butt's recent book, which is about waste workers in Lahore, Pakistan, where there is no sort of officially recognized terminology to name caste and to define marginalization and discrimination based on caste. And also there, the kind of inscribing and alienating happens on the basis of sensory claims, where most of the waste work is done by Dalit Christians, and non-Dalit waste workers, as well as other workers in the municipality, claim that you can smell the Christians from a distance, and that is the reason why they need to have separate recreational areas and separate settlements and such. So this is quite a sort of established analysis about the spatial sensorial order of caste that shapes much of the lived environment, the built environment, and there are multiple other examples as well. In my own field work, I have found in Shimla, in the Smart City project, the planners and like the Smart City, the whole project is run by a set of private management consultants. They often refer to settlements that are Dalit settlements that are very much planned. They are officially granted, government quarters to waste workers, but they refer to them routinely as slums, purely because they are, there's lower investment in the upkeep of the settlements, because it's inhabited by Dalits, because it's inhabited by waste workers. And this is again a kind of, sensorial affective regime that is put in place, where if you label the settlement and the dwellers as a slum, it becomes that much easier to then demolish it and not really, account for it in the smart city plans. So this is kind of like an established stream of scholarship that is there. And sort of building out of that foundation, I want to pivot slightly. And I really found useful this article by actually one of the former speakers in this series, Eduardo Bonilla Silva, who theorizes what he calls racialized emotions. And he says that there is a need, and he's speaking to his fellow sociologists, but I think there's a lot for geographers and others to learn as well. He said there's a need to comprehend that racial domination produces the entire emotional gamut. So hate and love, disgust and pleasure, aversion and empathy. And I find this really useful to enter into the kind of project and the kind of research that I want to do now, which comes from many different sort of instigations. So there has been like a call for flipping the gaze, where instead of making the subaltern the constant subject of study and constantly interrogating those who are already in the margins and sort of tapping them as sources of data, etc., we flip the gaze. And also, like from an autoethnographic point of view, because I do come from a very privileged, caste background and all manners of privileges. So to flip the gaze and to think about how does power operate through spaces and individuals and communities and structures of feeling that are not subaltern and marginalized, that are in fact very dominant and oppressive, and to then understand what are these regimes of, love and pleasure and empathy purportedly that keep the power structure of caste intact and create a new sort of spatial sensorial regime that is also very much a caste regime, but is not immediately recognized as such. And what work does that do in keeping caste alive in the modern day setting? So that's the kind of entry point that I'm coming from in this project. So here we have what I call invisible or invisibilized caste geographies. So this is from a data from Customs and Border Patrol from USA, and it's data from the US-Mexico border. And it shows the increase in the number of undocumented Indian migrants who were detained at this border. It's one of the most heavily policed borders in the world, as I'm sure everybody's aware. And there we see a steady increase since 2014. And there was a fall during the pandemic years and then a huge spike in 2022. And that has remained the trend. And there isn't a whole lot studied or written about this. In fact, when we think of the US-Mexico border, we often only think of Latin American migrants as like the key, subjects of police brutality and the violence of the border. But clearly there are a lot of Indian or people who are coded as Indian also at the receiving end of that border violence. And at the same time, we have seen most recently with the Spotlight and Usha ones and Rishi Sunak and others, that there is like this depiction of South Asian and primarily Indian diaspora as a diaspora of high-earning, highly educated, highly successful, politically mobile, politically influential, financially influential. And that's the kind of dominant image, I would argue, of the South Asian diaspora that circulates in the popular imagination, in the media, and to a certain extent in academic literature as well. And at the same time, these kinds of caste geographies remain unexamined, where the border is not seen as a place where caste operates at all. And although we cannot make, or I cannot at the moment make any strong claims about the caste character of these migrations, there is some amount of journalistic evidence. There are news reports that suggest where a handful of journalists have been able to actually interview Indians detained at the border. And there is some evidence that they have said that some of them are in fact trying to escape caste violence in South Asia and make this border crossing with the hopes of living a caste-free life in the US. And this is the sort of black hole that I think exists in the sort of academic setting as far as understanding the international or global geography of caste goes. And that's the kind of space that I'm trying to enter into with this project. So this is one of my primary case studies. It's one of several case studies that I'm hoping to look at in this project. And I'm going to talk about this one because I think it really brings together the themes of space and sensoria in a more kind of concrete way than others. Can I just have I know I can't ask the people online, but in the room, how many of you are aware of the existence of this temple in New Jersey? It was inaugurated in 2023. Vaguely, right. So let me tell you a little bit about it. This temple is built by an organization called BAPS. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the whole name because it's in Gujarati and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. But it's an elite Hindu sect. And it's one of the most powerful, most influential Hindu sects globally, and with a global presence. So even here in London, sorry, we are not in London, but here in the UK, in London, they have their temple, which is the place where Boris Johnson, for example, makes a visit on Diwali, and Rishi Sunak will make a visit on Diwali. And it's purportedly, the hub of the Hindu diaspora in London and the UK. And so this one in New Jersey is probably the most recent temple built by this sect, inaugurated in May 2023. And it has been described as the largest Hindu temple in the Western Hemisphere. And it was sort of, the idea was to build one. It's not a sort of happenstance. That was the idea, to build this grand Hindu presence. It's in Robbinsville in New Jersey. And while this temple was under construction in the summer of 2021, one very early morning, the FBI raided the construction site, and they allegedly found at least 200 men living and working there under what they describe as conditions of modern-day slavery. So they said these were men who were being paid negligible wages, around like $1 or so per day, who had been brought there on visas that are for religious volunteers, which automatically means that they do not have to be paid wages for their work. And that they had been kept there in very restrictive conditions, with like more than 12-hour-long work days. They were not allowed to leave the campus. They were not allowed to interact with outsiders, and various other kind of labor conditions that pretty much describe like conditions of indenture, or if I might make the leap and say conditions of slavery, as the FBI itself describes it. And so these around 200 men were rescued by the FBI. And the FBI since then has been prosecuting the BAPS at the court in New Jersey. And a little bit of drama sort of unfolded around this. Initially, there was a union, which is the Patthar Garhai Mazdoor Sangathan, which is a union based in Rajasthan. And this is essentially a caste-based union belonging to the particular caste whose specialization it is to undertake marble carving, which is very well established in Rajasthan. It's one of the things that Rajasthan is famous for. And these workers had all been brought to US to do marble carving and stone carving work for the purpose of building this temple from Rajasthan. And this union, along with other builders and mason workers union in New Jersey and across USA, made a statement saying that they are in solidarity with these workers who have been kept under these terrible conditions, and they will support the FBI in the ongoing litigations. And then about a year or more later, 12 of those litigants broke away from the main litigation and released a press statement in Rajasthan at the Rajasthan High Court with the help of a lawyer in India, distancing themselves from this court case, and said that, well, actually, we had been coerced into joining this litigation, and we would now like to withdraw. And in fact, we were there of our own volition. We were doing voluntary religious work. There is no slavery. There is no oppression, et cetera, et cetera. There's no discrimination. And a lot of right-wing news media, like The Organizer and Op India, they jumped onto this and they said, look, this was a false case. It's a conspiracy to defame Hindus in USA, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact remains that it's still very much, ongoing litigation. The FBI is pursuing the case. They haven't taken away any of the charges, and this remains very much, active. And here's a description of the temple from the BAPS website, where it describes it as a place of spirituality, where worship and traditions come together. I'll just skip to the last bits where it says, it represents the stories of the 12,500 volunteers who will forever be etched in history, a story of joy, a story of determination. So there is clearly, an affective appeal and a sensorial regime making happening here, where they try to depict the place, the temple itself, as a certain kind of place, and by extension, make appeals to reading the Hindu and upper caste Hindu community in the diaspora as a certain kind of community, without mentioning the word caste anywhere, but it's very much inscribed by caste. And here is an Instagram post from an acquaintance of mine who said, it's the ninth wonder of the world, elaborate carvings with millions of pieces put together, a must visit. Clearly, a sense of pride and elation which nobody would, immediately read as caste pride, but it is. It is at the end of the day, when you look at, the political economy of how the space was created and, how the built environment acquired the particular characteristics that are being celebrated here. So with that sort of background in place, the project seeks to ask a certain set of questions. So first is, what is caste in the 21st century and how is it experienced in a global setting? And I'm very conscious here of reading this not just from the subaltern perspective, not just to say how are Dalit workers experiencing USA, but to think about how is Hinduness, Indianness, South Asianness being depicted on the global setting, what kind of geographies is it forging, and where is the caste undercurrent or caste underpinning of it that has been sort of deliberately kept invisibilized and not immediately legible, and what work do we need to do to make it legible. So that's a sort of ontological question. Politically, how does this globalized meaning and experience of caste complicate the idea of Indian and South Asian, again, in the global setting, of course? And in policy terms, can international labor migration lead to caste liberation at home and abroad? And I'm sure we will talk a lot about this part, because I think, Ambedkar's quote is always circulating, where he says, on one hand, that wherever Indians go, they take, caste with him and with them. And on the other hand, that the cities can be a sort of, space of liberation from caste, which we know, unfortunately, that's not how it has played out. And I'm sure Jusmeet and Bhawani will talk more about that. And there's a brief graphic on methodology. I'm probably out of time, so I'm not going to go very much into the details of this. We can talk about it afterwards. And just like a final word, in terms of the kind of theoretical intervention that I hope to make with this project, I and my colleagues, that's not a one-person show. This is from the review that Burton Study wrote of Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, which has become very influential in good and bad ways. And she claims that there's a reason why caste has an enduring appeal as a framework to explain the organization of US society. And it's because it can be readily employed as shorthand for all forms of subjection emanating from systems of caste, class, and racism, regardless of history, context, geography, and form. And this project very much wants to work against that kind of deployment of caste in understanding US society, global society, any society, because caste is not ahistorical. Caste is not, an uprooted, unsituated kind of phenomenon. It might be global. It might have been global for a long time. It might be acquiring new forms of globality or globalness, but it is still very much historically embedded. And so the idea here is to bridge the kind of making legible of the caste underpinnings of certain spatial sensorial regimes, while also making that analysis useful to understanding global society and US society in a non-ahistorical, situated, deeply grounded, material sort of way. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Srilata, for the fantastic presentation. I will also like to start with a thanks to Manali, Ankur, Jusmeet, Priyanka, and Vishal for this invitation to participate in this fantastic conversation on caste. And in my research, I always find very comfort when we talk about practice, both in terms of as an analytical approach, especially the Bourdieuian approach, where practice theory becomes central, and also in terms of empirical research, when we go and doing ethnographically documenting practices. So it's very nice to see that I think you're bringing critical focus on practices here. I think caste can be talked at level of principle, system, ideologies, lived experiences, but it's a practice where the richness of it can be documented. So I think it's wonderful to come in here and speak on the theme of caste as practice. For my talk today, I'll be briefly presenting two examples from my research to think about caste as a socio-spatial practice. The first example comes from my my doctoral project, which I did, for which I had conducted fieldwork research in Rajasthan. And the second project is for my current research, which I'm doing fieldwork in Delhi. So in my project in Rajasthan, I have conducted a long-term ethnography of spatial struggle of a Dalit butcher community in an urbanizing village, which I'm calling Sartapur. So the village is located near an industrial area that is being influenced by the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor. So the region is industrializing and Sartapur is urbanizing. So lots of migrant workers are arriving from other states to this area, and they're working in the factories, and the places like Sartapur becomes important because they provide affordable housing for that. So in that sense, the capital is moving there, and the places like Sartapur are doing a very important function in terms of the kind of a network of capital accumulation there. And the local these are mostly rented accommodation, and the local economy is changing. So one of the key development that has happened in Sartapur is the emergence of the village bazaar, which is an old bazaar, which is expanding, emerging, and that's the retail market emergence is the one of the key development which has changed the local economy there. So more and more village residents wants to have a place in the bazaar, because for them, I think in the sense when we talk about how do you imagine mobility, economic mobility or future, having a place in the bazaar to have a shop there is a way of expressing that. So everybody wants to have a place in the bazaar. So with the arrival of the migrant workers and from other parts of the country, there's also an increase in the consumption of meat in the Sartapur bazaar. So meat consumption has increased. Goat meat and chicken has increased, and this has also become an opportunity for the butcher community to benefit from this increased demand. So the number of butcher shops has also increased manifold. So earlier there were like two butcher shops which used to operate on alternate days. Now it's like 6, 7, 8, 10, 12. So it has increased manifold. So these shops are primarily goat meat shops operated by a Dalit community and whose conventional caste occupation has been the goat butchers. So the butchers also wants to benefit from having a meat shop in the bazaar. But what is happening is the migrants coming in the area. Also, the land the value of land is changing. Land is becoming commodity, and also the increased meat and alcohol consumption, which is leading to is a kind of a ritual and moral crisis in the bazaar, especially amongst upper caste in that regard. So there is a ritual tension in the bazaar, and the butcher shops becomes one of the key sites where this tension is exhibited its maximum force. So the butcher wants to have a space in the space for the shops in the bazaar because it's a kind of a stigmatized occupation, and they cannot have a space in the bazaar. So that's the only option for them to work and benefit from their from this opportunity in the bazaar is to open their meat market on an encroached land on one side of the bazaar, not in the bazaar, but outside the bazaar, linked to the bazaar. So it's outside the bazaar. So this is kind of a historical emergence of a new socio-spatial margins with industrialization, which is that is happening there. So they have their 6 to 10 meat kiosk, meat hoka on the public encroached land, and that's where away from the public view. So the public view, the distancing of the is the central requirement there. So, but the meat market which they establish is not it's a new social spatial margin in Sartapur, but does not remain a static or fixed market. So with the increasing industrialization, the bazaar is also expanding, and the expanding bazaar needs space. It needs land. So with each episode of the expansion of the bazaar, a new displacement is forced on the butchers on the meat market. And so with each expansion, that's their condition. They want to benefit from the expansion of the the bazaar and more expansion of it. They benefit from it, but also it means that paradoxically, it means lots of spatial displacement from that. And these displacement are about 50 meters, 100 meters. These are micro displacement, 150 meters, this kind, just to enough the bazaar expands, just to maintain the distance from the public. So that's the logic of it. So in that sense, in the physical distance, it's a lot, but the ritual importance is quite significant. So I've collected the oral history accounts of this displacement to examine caste as a socio-spatial practice. So the development of bazaar, thus again, it becomes a cyclic process of establishing the meat market and waiting for a displacement, and then the displacement, when it happens, uprooting it, and then reestablishing it at another site. And some of the time, this displacement is because of a new shop has opened, sometimes there's a new hotel, sometimes there's a government building, sometimes there's a school, sometimes there's a temple. So there are lots of reasoning in that, which comes into this regard. And all these displacement are mediated by the police, the Sarpanch, village council head, and the SDM as well. So that's the kind of that's the empirical part of this analysis. How do we think about it in conceptually? Well, how do these stories of displacement help us understand caste as a socio-spatial practice? So I tried to use the critical lens of chronotop as a way. Mikhail Bakhtin, the literary scholar, have used it to examine how do we to theorize meaning from language and discourses. And then chronotop in the sense that how do we think about configuration of space and time and how it helps us understand meaning. Keith Basu, the linguist anthropologist, have used in case of Apache community, in which he talks about how the community's wisdom sits in places in the sense the community models are spatialized. So how does intertwining of the community model tales happens with the space? So what I'm just trying to, I think, argue or suggest here is that we can use chronotop as a way to interpret the configuration of time and space, and I mean perhaps in three ways. The first way I think we can use chronotop in this regard, in case of examining a meat market as a caste chronotop, would be there's lots of movement in space here. So the space, I think there's lots of dynamic spatial dynamics. So their spatial locations are changing, but the spatial positions are not changing. So the spatial relations are being reproduced in that regard. So the caste distance is being repeated. So there's lots of change, lots of flux, but yet I think the class displacement is there. So in that sense, if we just talk about the spatial relations in that regard, this reproduction of caste distance is indicating this time as a time of caste, or caste time of caste. And even if we relativize it in the sense that if we're talking about caste time, so relative to caste, this is a timeless phenomena. The reproduction is happened. I think in this case, I'm just relatively saying it is like from 1990s to like current, like last 30 years. I think this has been happening multiple times. So the caste is, I mean, this might also suggest in a way that when we're talking about a timeless reproduction of caste, this might also lead to certain interpretation. That is it again, the Dumo's theory about ritual purity and pollution as the founding principle, and it's a timeless principle. I mean, I'm not reading it in that way because I think the difference here is that here I'm reading this production of caste distance as caste power. So it is related to essentially a question of power in that regard. So that's one way, the production of spatial relations, spatial distance with the changing in the spatial position. So that's one way the chronotop it can be used. The second way it can also be used in a way that when I'm talking to my interlocutor and documenting their oral history accounts of this displacement, each of them have a count, how many times they have been displaced. So this count becomes important because that becomes a way of them reckoning time. The unit of the displacement become a unit of time, like week, months, how many times they have displacement. And this is very important, especially when we're talking about narrative time. And here I'm using Paul Ricoeur's idea of narrative time, that our subjectivity, our identity is being constituted by way we construct narrative involving ourselves. The story is about we construct ourselves. If we are constructing narrative to construct our identity and subjectivities, the employment of this narrative, what's the time used in that regard? I'm suggesting that this time displacement as a unit of time is shaping your subjectivity in that deep temporal sense. So in this regard, caste, I think analysis moved from caste as being to caste as becomings. So this is caste becomings when it happens, when you're viewing it through that kind of temporality. So that's perhaps a second way which we can use in terms of this chronotopic analysis of the time. And the third way, I'm just simply using it in a way that regard that perhaps a meat kiosk could also be interpreted as a chronotop that is fusing space and time, because this is a permanent temporariness. So the people, I think, like for 15 year, 20 year, 30 year, there are different histories in which they are moved with their butcher kiosk. I think this is a very material kind of thinking about what does caste chronotop could mean in this regard. So my suggestion in this example is just to understand, to understand caste as a spatial practices by thinking about meat market in an urbanizing village as a caste chronotop. So that's my first example. I'll quickly move from Rajasthan to Delhi to my second example. So my second example comes from my current project in which I'm conducting an ethnography of everyday life in Delhi's informal settlement. And in this, I want to focus on a Sundar camp squatter settlement to start thinking about caste as spatial practice. So Sundar camp is located on the edge of the Najafgarh drain, an open drain in Delhi. And this is passing through Delhi. And I'm just trying to understand how does a drain engender or constitute space? How does it constitute space in the city, and especially how it produces this is a spatial production of interstitial microgeographies in the city that are helpful to understand caste as a spatial reproduction. As for first thing for this thing, the first thing is to understand when we're talking about how does what kind of spaces are drain and genders, is to think about how the spaces become marked by physical danger and physical pollution. So this is a place next to the drain. This is a space marked by waste, dirt, sewage, industrial pollution. This is also a space marked by, I think in the previous talk, it was also mentioned, this is also a place marked by odor and stench. This is also a place which is marked by mosquito, rat, pigs, and etc. And this also is a place which is constituted by a fear of unknown, because people generally don't go there. So their imaginative construction of this space as of kind of, we do not know, because once you don't know, that's what it becomes a space of danger. And I think all these kind of things, these material dimensions renders the site next to drain as spaces of material pollution and as spaces of physical danger. So this is the physical production of the space. And I think what is also important is that just to see that how do simultaneously these spaces also become a ritual production. There's a ritual production of these spaces as well. So dirt, waste, sewage are all strong matters and mediums of ritual pollution. And also the one edge of the Sartapur is being enclosed by a cremation ground. So the death ritual associated with ritual pollution associated with death is a constitutive condition of Sartapur in that regard. So I think that's how this is being produced as a space of intense ritual danger. So this is the material and symbolic dimensions combined to produce space. So the material and symbolic dimensions combine to produce a space which is generally said that nobody can live here. And precisely because nobody can live there, Dalits can live there. You know? So that's where this is come. I think this is a structural violence formulation. I think the paradigmatic formulation of structural violence in that regard. So this is how Sundar Camp started, from the first act of squatting, hidden squatting, and just over a period of 3 decades, it is becoming a full settlement of about 1,000 shanties. And the majority of the residents are Dalits who have migrated from Bihar and Rajasthan, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. And this is also what Gopal Guru have theorized. Gopal Guru has theorized as, moving from margins to margins, and migration as a moral protest. So I think all these things become important, that how does the re-territorialization in the cities happen in that regard. So this is also these sites also become the primary spaces where the modes of urban belonging for many Dalits is imagined, in the sense that urban belonging is being the first step in the city. And these settlements are not merely sites of dwelling, but more importantly, and they are also sites of livelihood and labor. So Sundar Camp started where the predominant neighborhood level or settlement level economy is that people go and collect waste, city's solid waste from neighborhood around, and they bring all the solid waste in the settlement, and they sort it there to recover valuable plastic, paper, metal, and all these things. So in that sense, that when we're talking about all the solid waste as a kind of medium and matter of ritual pollution as well, it's all flowing in there. It's a concentrated spot where the ritual processing in the city is happening. So that's where I think the ritual labor of the city, these sites become important to perform that kind of ritual labor in the city. So so the squatter settlement, in that sense of thinking more, the squatter settlement is a sort of have a ritual density, and this ritual density is shaped by how do stigmatized spaces and how do stigmatize spaces, stigmatize identities, and stigmatize occupation. The way they come into formation, that shapes the ritual density of a place. And so in that sense, these are caste dense spaces. So these are dense spaces, but these are also analytically very dense spaces. There are lots of theorization which have come to in relations to these spaces. I think this has been theorized, for instance, the political society claim making. This has been theorized as state of exception. This has been theorized as kind of urban occupancy urbanism. This has been theorized as so I think there are lots of theorization. These are analytically dense spaces as well. These are also spaces of laughter. These are also spaces of conviviality. These are also spaces of cosmopolitan imagination. And these are also spaces of making claims, lived experience based claim making, social justice claim making as well. So this is what all is this is about. So I think in conclusion, then I would just say that to understand caste as practice, caste as spatial practices, we need to examine how both the material and symbolic dimensions, the interaction between them. I think the material dimension, you can have a lot of class, labor, urban, poor kind of analysis, but the intricacy, the ritual density, and how it shapes. So lots of people are making different kind of claim, which can be read as kind of material claim. But if we do not understand, or if we do not include the kind of ritual dimensions of lived experiences, then I think it might be difficult to interpret their politics, their claim making, because if it might be influenced by kind of a ritual dimension of it, it might, I think, so that's why the ritual and the material dimensions co-constitute their politics. So I think I'll just stop here. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Srilata and Bhawani, for coming and sharing your work with us. And I think it's really amazing because there are a lot of bridges that are being built while I'm listening to you. And I think you'd see also in my presentation as well. So keeping in line with the panel's theme, I call my presentation The Order of Segregation. Oh, it's not working. Oops. So I assume you all are familiar with the fivefold Varna division of caste, where ex-untouchables are at the bottom of this hierarchy. And I don't want to go into details of that, but I think what I want to stress is that when we use terms such as ex-untouchables, scheduled castes, or Dalits, it's important to remember that this is not a homogeneous category. Actually, there are many, many different castes that are part of this aggregated category with different cultural cosmologies, ascribed occupations, cultural rules around food, marriages, etc. So for instance, these are the castes that I work with in Ajmer, Rajasthan. So you have Kolis, weavers at the left-hand side of the spectrum. Then you have a bunch of castes that work with leather or meat. And then you also have some ex-criminal, ex-nomadic tribes that are part of this system, of this category. So in terms of the roadmap for the presentation, in the introduction, I will situate my context, question, case study, and methods, and I'll briefly share my theoretical framework, which is actually building on what Bhawani was just saying about material symbolic. Then I will talk about the findings about the structural origins of order, and with a discussion, and I will conclude. So I was meeting this very gentle Christian man who was working in the Insurance Corporation of India, and I was broadly sort of talking about my work with this person, and he suddenly said to me, if you stand next to them, the ex-untouchables, they stink like anything. And he frowned his face in disgust. On another occasion, I was interviewing Ajit, who is a successful property dealer from the Koli ex-untouchable caste. He has a master's degree, speaks English, dresses up dapperly, and he told me that because of his complexion and light-skinned complexion and personality, nobody identifies him as a Dalit. But he says that my friend circle of non-ex-untouchable castes would say, see that area, pointing to the largest Koli ghetto in the city, how filthy that is. It is filled with Kolis. They use this kind of language and make me realize that after all, I am a Koli. So the two quotations read together create a noxious symbolic boundary for the ex-untouchables, that they stink and that they are filthy. Even though these are extremely stigmatizing and demeaning comments, and my own experience was not of ex-untouchables smelling bad, I still want to treat these remarks with a sociological subjectivity because of two incidents that happened in the field. So the first incident happened in February 2017. when I spent about 10 hours in Koli ghettos and came back home to where I was living then. And my host said, "Aap mein se ajeeb si boo aa rahi hai. You are smelling strange." I didn't pay attention to that and moved on. But the same thing happened again in September 2019. That time, I was not working in Koli ghettos, but in a Kanjar ghetto, a different caste. I was there from 7 in the morning till late 11 in the night. And this time, the host's daughter opened the door, squeezed her nose, and said, "Oh, you stink. Where are you coming from?" She later added, "Your room has also been smelling strange lately." So this time I took a shower and then deeply sniffed my clothes. They smelled unpleasant and foreign. Rustic, smoky, rancid, sweaty, dusty. I couldn't put a right adjective on it. And indeed, we have very little lexicon about odors and to describe odors. So the shower won't take away the smell from my hair. And what I realized was that spending time in these areas was actually changing my own bodily odors. So the research question that I'm trying to address in this presentation is, how does odor affect caste boundaries? I conducted my study in the city of Ajmer, which has a population of about 600,000 people. And due to its political, administrative, and industrial history, Ajmer has an unusually high ex-untouchable population. So 25% of the city is composed of scheduled castes, when the national average is about 12.6%. So I conducted multi-sited ethnography over 13 months. I was going in and out many different ex-untouchable areas, middle-class areas, poor areas, upper caste areas, mixed areas, and so on and so forth. I conducted a household survey of about 700 households in a majority ex-untouchable neighborhood. And it's important to mention this, that my focus was on segregation. I was trying to understand caste and space, not smells. And I didn't have the tools to actually think about smells or knew the literature very well then. So what happened was that as I was conducting this embodied ethnography, my body became a mean to absorb odors. And I would constantly write about odors in my field notes without even me realizing it. And this was the data that emerged in this paper is from a phenomenological approach about how I was experiencing and recording odors. So I use the theoretical framework from Loïc Wacon's recent work on Bourdieu in the city. So he calls it the Bourdieusian trialectic of symbolic space, social space, and physical space. So symbolic space being cognitive categories to classify people, places, objects, and activities. Social space is distribution of agents in objective positions defined by the allocation of efficient resources. So we can think about caste in a kind of a hierarchical fashion with different allocation of resources. We can imagine occupations, for instance. And physical space is bounded three-dimensional material expanse within which agents and institutions are geographically situated and their actions take place. So then the trialectic is to think relationally between these three different spaces, or better even topologically, by tracing the layered connections between the three spaces. So let me move to the empirical findings about the structural origins of odor. So most of the literature about odor is constructed around this idea that odor is cultural, right? It's about how we eat, how we carry out ritualistic activities, and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to show in this article is that odors are also structural. But before I can discuss the odor of segregation, we have to first understand how caste segregation is itself organized. So based on my survey data, I want to show you the micro disaggregated view of caste segregation here. So every dot represents a household and every color a social group. So violet squared dots, for instance, represent ex-untouchable households, saffron pentagon for upper caste, and so on and so forth. So I want to draw your attention, first of all, to the three main roads. And I think I was very excited to see the main roads also appearing in Bhawani's work. And I think that's the work that the main roads does here. So what you see is that all of these blue areas where the upper castes and mixed with Christians and Sindhis and Sikhs are living, they're systematically closest to the main roads, right? So this is what I call the outer road citadels. As you move inside, you see that the number of ex-untouchables start increasing. But these are ex-untouchables who are actually middle-class ex-untouchables, right? So this is what I call the inner road ghettos. And finally, when you go really to the core, the furthest possible from the main roads, you have the poorest ex-untouchables actually segregated in the center of these areas. And this is one big neighborhood composed of 14 sub-neighborhoods, but this pattern is replicating across Ajmer, wherever I would visit in different parts of the city. So second kind of organization that has been happening is around what I call disadvantaged topographies. So I was meeting Rajat, who was a retired Valmiki public sector employee, and he told me that there used to be a parkota, a spatial boundary, where the inner city is. But the untouchables could not stay there and use the term untouchable in English. They were put near the mountains or at the foothills. Paharganj, literally neighborhood on a hill, is where all untouchables live. Bhangis, Raigars, Chamar, Sasi, Kanjar. UIT, the housing body, also made housing for untouchables far away from the city center, not inside, right? These are untouchables and therefore their settlement should be kept away from the main city. These are all next to filthy areas. So the disadvantaged topography is not, it's composed of many different things. It's composed of flood-prone zones, open sewers, which again came out in Bhawani's presentation in the second part, public toilets, waste collection bins, railway tracks, etc. So the ghettos, the caste ghettos, the core ghettos, the poorest ex-untouchable areas are actually located in and around these disadvantaged topography. And this is systemic and systematic across different caste groups that I was working with. And they serve as a marker of boundary of ex-untouchable neighborhood. So this is the sewer that Rajat was talking about. This is a huge, about 6-meter wide sewer that is cutting across that big neighborhood that I conducted my fieldwork in. And so on the left-hand side, you have these relatively well-off middle-class Dalits, but still living next to the sewers. And on the right-hand side, you have the Koli and Berwa ex-untouchables caste living there. This is the entrance of the Koli core ghetto. And this is a picture of a public toilet from Sasi Basti. And in fact, the Dalit autobiographies mention very evocatively about these disadvantaged topographies. So for instance, Kaushalya Besantri writes, she describes how she loathed entering her basti in Nagpur, where a public toilet was at its entrance, filled with excreta everywhere, black, red, or brown, making me nauseous every morning. So the direct consequence of these disadvantaged topographies is filth, and filth stinks. And we know that smells are not randomly distributed. They are located with a reference to a source. And these are the multiple sources, the disadvantaged topographies that are dotting the ex-untouchable areas. But the problem becomes even worse with lack of public services. So I was meeting Manoj in the Koli ghetto, and he was telling me about the state of public services. So he'd say, the employees of Nagar Nigam, the municipal corporation, work on the main road of the ghetto, right? Not the main road that I was saying. Of course, these are much cleaner. They work on the main road, but they don't come inside. They say, "Rediyan nahi nikalti hain, naliyan hi itni hain." These carts, the carts don't pass. There are so many wide drains, so no one comes here to clean them. This is a picture from the Regar ghetto, which is situated on a hilly terrain. I visited it in September 2018 in late monsoon period. So this is again a waste collection site with a lot of pigs sort of clustered there. And when it was raining so much, because it's on a hilly terrain, I was at the top of the hill, the water from all of this filth is flowing into this street when you go down. This is another photograph from a Kanjar ex-untouchable ghetto where the cleaning happened of the drains, but all the filth from the drains was just left outside and not taken care of. And the whole area, the whole street, and you can see the everyday life actually moving around this filth and these malodors. But caste occupations also actually create these structural odors. So I was talking to a retired female Sikh teacher, and she told me, "Unke noton mein se bhi beedi ki smell aati hai," referring to the coolies who actually work with the beedi making. So she's saying that even the notes, the bank notes that they would give to this teacher in a school as fee would smell of tobacco. So this is a very common sight. If you go to the Koli and Berwa neighborhoods, almost every household has women working, rolling these biris, and it smells of biris even before you enter the neighborhood because there's a biri factory right inside the middle of the neighborhood. But again, it's not just about biris. It's also about jute gunny smell or rubber production from flip-flops in Regar ghetto, detergent and wastewater puddles in the Dhobi Ghat, where the washerwomen caste actually live. And in the Luhar ghetto, this is the smell of the cow dung from their domesticated cow sheds. So I also noticed that Gadia Luhars, Kanjars, and Sasis would use firewood to cook food. So again, it's a structural smell, right? And I thought this is a cultural preference. They just like to use firewood. When I was talking to Mavi, he told me that they used to actually be able to afford the LPG gas cylinders. But now we are forced to do that to cook on firewood because we don't have any jobs. Our jobs were taken away after demonetization. So the smoke that I was seeing around so much was actually a result of this structural decision around policy that impoverished entire neighborhoods in these areas. So what I'm trying to sort of argue here that odors are not only cultural, they're also structural. But these stigmatizing odors are accumulative through various disadvantaged topographies, filth produced in these areas, caste occupations, urban poverty, and lack of public services. It's just not one source, it's like multiplying and compounding over time. But the concentric contiguous organization of segregation, the map that I showed you, also prevents air circulation because all of the upper castes are living closest to the main roads and they are actually very well ventilated houses, but these are also very tall houses. So they actually prevent air from going inside deep into these inner streets. And these inner streets are also cul-de-sac streets, which is, how do you say, like one-ended. So it's like you cannot go inside or you cannot go across this. So the air also stops physically from this kind of built environment. And when you're living in this area, and this would happen in a few hours, and when I was later living, the same thing was happening, you're constantly exposed to these malodors. You cannot escape them. Whatever you do, whatever products you use, however clean you live, you are constantly exposed to these malodors, and they get stuck to everything that you have, your belongings, your hair, your clothes, and so on and so forth. So anyone living in the caste ghetto, in the core ghetto, will actually start smelling pungent. So it's not the smell of ex-untouchables, it's the smell of the place. So the argument that I make is that the social boundaries of caste are spatialized into segregated core ghettos, which is pathway A. The space of the ghetto is what produces these malodors, which then get stuck to ex-untouchables living in these ghettos, to their clothes and objects, as I was saying. That's pathway B. And this odor then reproduces caste when the Christian LIC officer or Ajit, the property dealer, was telling me that, well, you know, they make me realize that I am, even if I'm not living there, through odors. And so this is where, through the interaction of social, symbolic, and spatial spaces, the trialectic of all of these, that is reproducing caste hierarchies here. So to conclude, I'll make 4 points. Odor is not only cultural, but also structural. When you're studying segregation, you need to take into account the sensorial aspect of it. So the urban sociology, broadly constructed, never actually discussed sensorial aspects of segregation. And as I mentioned here, it's very, very crucial to sort of bring that into the fore. Third, my paper also offers a novel mechanism of reproduction of caste through space and odors, building on Joel Lee's work and Shivani Kapoor's work. And finally, pollution is not only ritualistic, it actually spreads to material and sensorial aspects that Bhawani was also talking about in his presentation. So thank you very much, and we look forward to all the questions.